you have challenged me in really important ways. You have challenged me to think differently about capitalism and what is necessary at this time of climate crisis. So I just want to welcome you again, and thank you for being here. And I want to begin by just asking you if you would be willing to share on a personal level a little bit with us. I think of you as a revolutionary, as someone who is deeply engaged in the project of trying to reimagine the kind of world and democracy we want to have, and fighting for it. But I wonder whether you think of yourself as a revolutionary, and if you could share a little bit about how you came to justice work and kind of became the thinker that you are.
Well, first of all, I'd just love to say how happy I am to be here, and thank everybody who's part of the union community for welcoming here. I feel the weight of history in this amazing church, and I'm just so happy to be in conversation with you, Michelle. And I think you know how mutual the learning has been between the two of us. And in fact, we talked on the phone before that gathering about how we felt like we had sort of been reaching towards each other from different places in our work, and that we really should talk. And it's just every time I talk with you and read you, I learn something new, and I'm so intensely grateful for your honesty and ethics and brilliance. I think of myself, to be honest, first and foremost, as a researcher, as an investigator. I come to politics through my journalism, and my journalism, my research, my analysis has brought me to a progressively more radical place. I follow my research where it leads me, and I think there's been a trajectory in my books where I think I started off from a place that was a little bit more kind of nostalgic about a sort of kinder, gentler capitalism. I thought maybe we could turn back the clock. Where I am now, after a couple decades of this work, and increasingly in a more political space, not just reporting but organizing, I am, utterly convinced that the scale of the crises we face requires revolutionary change. That whether we're talking about the ecological crisis, whether we're talking about white supremacy, whether we're talking about toxic masculinity, whether we're talking about grotesque levels of inequality and poverty and dispossession, whether we're talking about the treatment of migrants around the world, the fact that more people are on the move right now than at any point since the Second World War, the scale of the intersecting, interrelated crises that we face requires systemic change. That reformism is not up to our historical moment. And I think nothing has convinced me of that more than really just studying climate science and understanding the depth and speed of change that is required. And we can maybe come back to that. So I would say, as an analyst, I have no doubt about the need for that depth of change, this sort of punctuated transformation on multiple fronts. Whether I feel some discomfort in calling myself a revolutionary, because I don't think I've earned that, and I don't know. I don't know that you can be a revolutionary without a revolution. And I like to think that if there was one, I would show up.
When Angela Davis was here, I asked her a similar question, and she said, I'm trying to be a revolutionary.
Understand you to be a revolutionary, or understand that you were, and that I try to be, or that you try to be still.
And I thought that was kind of a wonderful way of describing impassioned speech, and at some point he says, "I am a revolutionary."
With the last words on my lips, that I am a revolutionary. And you're going to have to keep on saying that. You're going to have to say that I am a proletarian. I am the people. I'm not the pig. You got to make a distinction. And the people are going to have to attack the pig. The people are going to have to stand up against the pig.
I'm a revolutionary. And he's inviting the audience to join in. And slowly you see, one by one, people in the crowd beginning to say it and join in the chant and stand up one by one. And it was people of all different races and backgrounds kind of claiming it, saying, I'm willing to commit myself to working towards a radically different world. And it was just this powerful moment that caused me to reflect on, wow, am I there yet? Am I at a place where I can say I'm committed to that in that way? And that's one of the reasons why I asked the question. I'm trying to be, and I'm leaning into that as best I can. And, you know, one of the reasons I asked the question too is that, you know, I think there's a lot of frustration right now with Trump voters and Trump sympathizers, and certainly I have had a lot of frustration even with kind of mainstream Democrats who kind of play along with systems and politics that I feel have been disastrous for poor people and people of color. But in those moments of frustration, I also have to acknowledge that I didn't always think the way that I do now. That I wasn't born thinking that we needed a radically new system of justice, or that we needed to reimagine our democracy, or to ask deep questions about capitalism. I wasn't born that way, and I certainly wasn't raised in a family that was asking those questions. And so how we get from, you know, a place of being born into a nation where so much injustice is normalized, how we get from being someone who has absorbed that through osmosis or through our family or through our culture or through television to someone who's actually willing to question it and take risks and stand together with others as part of movements that are challenging the systems in a deep way, I think is an important part of us thinking more critically about how we go about building our movements. So my question was partly, how did you, when you weren't born criticizing capitalism, was it because of the work that you did as a journalist, going to countries, investigating the way in which austerity programs were operating, or what was it that began your path to asking the kinds of questions that you've been asking, with such brazenness now for many years?
I mean, I'm certainly changed by my research, and the research that I do is the kind of research where I go there. I'm not just sort of writing from my desk about what is going on in sweatshops in Indonesia, which was a big part of my first book that I wrote in my 20s, or the overthrow of democratic governments. I mean, I do a lot of field research. I'm changed by my research. I meet people who blow my mind and change my worldview. I identify with people I write about, but I feel a little bit illegitimate in this question, because it is a journey, and I have changed in my journey, and my experiences have pushed me to a different place than where I started. And I think we always have to remember that we can't expect people to be where we are. But that said, I see an appetite for radicalism among young people today that certainly wasn't true of my generation. Like, they're a lot more ready for it and drawn to it. Like, if you're out there saying, this is a plan for a revolution, people will show up in a way where I think for my generation, we felt that would be a liability. You wouldn't want to admit you were a revolutionary because, I grew up in the neoliberal, 80s and 90s. But the reason why I say I feel a little bit illegitimate is because I was kind of born into it.
Well, that's part of your story.
Yeah, it is part of my story. And so So here I'll do my lefty confessional. We're all friends here, right? This is where Martin Luther King delivered the Beyond Vietnam speech, right? Before I was born. So I'm a child of Vietnam War draft resistors. And the reason why I live in Canada is because my father is a draft dodger, was a war resistor. And so, he faced this choice. So this is the story that I grew up with. This is the story that I was told about who I am, why we live where we live in this country where we don't have any family, why we're afraid to cross the border. Like, all of that is stuff that happened before I was born. My father and mother fled to Canada when my mom was pregnant. My dad didn't want to go to jail. They heard that there was a customs agent at the Montreal airport, Dorval, that was sympathetic to draft dodgers if you flew in at midnight, and they did it, and they had landed immigrant status by Monday morning, because at the time we had a government that didn't just make memes about how immigrants were welcome, but actually welcomed a lot of immigrants. And so I grew up with these stories about, why it was important to not be part of the war machine, that you take actions and they do have consequences. And one of the reasons why my father decided, like, he had filed for conscientious objector status, but he had been raised in a very left family. His parents were socialists in Newark. His father was an artist and actually had a job working for Walt Disney. And this was another really important story for me, was hearing these stories about my grandfather, who was, he was an animator. So, for kids, Disney is everything, right? And so it was a huge source of pride to me that my grandfather had animated some of my favorite movies. Like they could point to the scene, in Bambi, or, and that was the part that he'd animated. He was actually in charge of Donald Duck continuity, which was making sure that people drew Donald Duck exactly the same way in every frame. And my grandfather was like magic. He would draw on a napkin, in 4 strokes, and suddenly it was Donald Duck. But so that was true, and that was this amazing thing. And then the other thing that I grew up learning was that he had organized a union. I had been one of the key organizers of the first animator strike in Anaheim, and had not only been fired but blacklisted, and never been able to work as an artist again, and it really shattered his life. And so just kind of, I grew up very much with this idea of, like, there's this story behind the shiny happy story, right? Knowing that, like, Disney had done this terrible thing to my grandfather, like the shiniest, happiest thing for kids, and just trying to hold these two ideas in my head, I think is what turned me into an investigative journalist, because it was sort of like, I feel like I've always been, my whole life I've been trying to, like, peel back the shine, like, what's behind it, like, what's behind the happy face, and also trying to kind of hold these ideas in these tensions of, like, but I'm drawn to this, and we're still allowed to kind of like the movies, but yet we think that, blacklisting and testifying before the House of Un-American Activities and all of that is really awful. So, these are the narratives of my childhood, and that, I think that definitely put me on this journey of trying to understand, the stories behind the stories we're told.
Well, I love that story, because it turns out some people are born revolutionaries. And, I think that's, even what that means for many of us raising children at this time, and how we talk about this particular political moment and how we're responding to it, and what our kids see us doing or not doing in these times is all very important and meaningful. One of the things that I really appreciate about the evolution of your work, and I guess I appreciate it because it parallels in many ways the evolution of mine, is that you have increasingly argued that we don't need simply kind of just a political revolution or even an economic one, but that ultimately we really need to have kind of a moral revolution, and that it's impossible to develop kind of a plan of action for change if we don't examine very carefully our kind of values and recognize that these are moral questions and not purely political ones or economic ones.